Last week, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments on Obamacare, and now we're in the writing phase. But what's the possible outcomes of this case, both in terms of the constitutional implications and politically? We're going to talk about it today on Faith and Freedom. I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Matt Barber, vice president of Liberty Counsel Action. Matt, last week, of course, they heard 3 days of oral argument. A week ago today was Thursday, and they ultimately ruled or got together on Thursday or Friday of last week to vote on this case. So right now we're in the writing phase.
So the decision has been made.
The decision has been made.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know what that decision is,
right,
and that decision can change as they go through the writing. If you think back in 1992 with the Planned Parenthood versus Casey case where Roe versus Wade was being challenged, the decision was made as well. At the end of the week of oral arguments, there was a vote 5-4 to overturn Roe versus Wade. Chief Justice, or then the late Chief Justice William Rehnquist, was writing the majority opinion for 30 days. He was lobbied, or Kennedy was lobbied by O'Connor and by Souter. And 30 days later, as the writing had already been progressing, he changed his vote. The following 30 days, he switched, and the decision was taken away from Rehnquist and given to someone else in the other majority, formerly the dissent.
Shows you what one vote can do 55 million lives later.
That's right. And then June, a decision came out. So for 30 days it went one way, for 30 days it went the other way, and Roe versus Wade.
So it can change. People need to be in prayer.
That's right. So no matter what they voted last week, it can still change.
Yeah.
So it's not. We're not going to know exactly what the outcome is until we actually have the opinion released in the end of June.
Well, if the outcome is as I hope and believe it should be, this is such an unusual case, unprecedented for the federal government to compel people to purchase a good or a service, in this case insurance. Matt, if they can force you to buy health insurance, why not life insurance? I mean, life insurance is a benefit to individuals and to families. Can't they?
Funeral insurance too. I mean, everyone dies. I mean, you think
sure,
about everyone participating in something.
Why draw the line? My question is, why draw the line at life insurance, and then why draw the line at insurance? How about health club memberships? I mean, health people.
Well, I mean, if it sounds absurd, but everyone will die.
Yeah.
And unless, the Lord comes in while you're still alive. But everyone is going to die. That's a certainty. Many people are uninsured when they die, and who picks up the tab? It's the taxpayers. Yeah. Not everyone is going to have health coverage or care. Many people die before they ever have health treatment. Or if they do, they don't have health insurance. My mother never had health insurance. She always paid as she went. So force people to buy funeral insurance, then death insurance. I mean, you can, like you're saying, you can
life
go on
insurance.
And on and on.
Yeah.
Now, there's several alternatives that could happen out of this. The best one, obviously, and the one that we're praying for and we're asking people to pray for, is that Obamacare is ruled unconstitutional and the entire law is struck down because the whole thing is a monstrosity. If that's the case, of course, that's the signature piece of President Obama. It's going to be huge political ramifications as people move forward through this year. That's the best case. Politically or not politically, in terms of the implications. From a constitutional freedom and life perspective, Obamacare's got to go.
Yeah.
That's the best case. The next situation could be that the individual mandate is struck down and the rest of the law is allowed to stand. That's a problem because if that's the case, if it is not repealed, then it'll ultimately collapse the insurance system and will ultimately cause a catastrophic failure of the entire insurance industry nationwide. You simply can't have the rest of the law in effect without the individual mandate. It just simply doesn't work. And then the other possibility is that it could be upheld. And, that's why we're saying, Lord, deliver us from Obamacare. That is an unimaginable situation. But somebody says, well, okay, if it's upheld, that will energize people to go to the polls and people will vote. That's true. You will have to actually have new blood on the Senate to have a majority of people that are in favor of repealing Obamacare. You already have that on the House.
Probably need a filibuster-proof Senate with those controlling that are willing to vote against Obamacare.
That's right. You'd probably have to have a filibuster.
Yeah.
In other words, you'd have to have a supermajority, 60 people in the Senate to overcome a potential filibuster. So it's not just a majority of 51. And then, of course, you'd also need probably a new president, because if President Obama is president, he would veto anything that repealed Obamacare. That would then make the requirement of the House and Senate to be the supermajority to come back
to override
the veto. Yeah. So, you could have all of that. Assume that you did. Assume that you changed the Senate enough and the House enough and the White House enough that you could repeal this and it's veto-proof. Then you get rid of Obamacare. But what do you have left in the wake?
Right.
You've got the precedent of the Supreme Court. Obamacare is gone. But what the Supreme Court has now done is they've set up the unprecedented power of the federal government. And all they need to do is get enough votes again, and Obamacare comes back into existence. Or if it's not Obamacare today, it could be forcing people to buy whatever insurance or join a health club or eat healthy or buy a certain vehicle that some federal bureaucrats want you to do.
So best case scenario, obviously, the Supreme Court finds, as they should, that Obamacare is grossly unconstitutional. Not best case scenario, a little bit better scenario, I think, would be that the individual mandate is found unconstitutional. Severability, we can argue that, and ultimately it has to go away because it's just unsustainable. It's the worst case scenario is that it is found constitutional and is not repealed. That would be terrible, but it's still a very, very bad thing.
Yeah, that's the worst case.
That's the worst case scenario. It's still a very bad thing if this Supreme Court finds it constitutional, even if Obamacare is repealed, because it has essentially written a blank check for the federal government to do anything it wants to do. Period.
Yeah, so you really do have four alternatives.
That's
the worst of the worst is the Supreme Court upholds Obamacare, and there's not enough votes to repeal
and it actually goes into effect.
That would be catastrophic in many respects because it would do significant damage to the Constitution. You literally have to rewrite our Constitution to give the federal government that kind of power. And you've essentially unleashed the federal government to override the individual states. Basically, the 10th Amendment doesn't mean anything more. There's no states' rights. And individual liberty can be trampled on by federal bureaucrats. And what you see right now with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, just coming up off the cuff with these mandates. I'm going to force you to do this. I'm going to force you to do that. Oh, we're going to compromise, but they really didn't compromise. That will become rampant throughout Obamacare.
Are you kidding? It's arbitrarily written into the legislation. The Secretary of Health and Human Services shall ... She has a
or
again,
may.
Or
in
may.
The worst cases is may. Where the statute, the legislators give the complete discretion to act or not to act, to create regulation or not create regulation.
We've already seen it with
the Secretary.
We've already seen it with the contraceptive and abortifacient mandates, forcing Christians to violate their conscience to engage this Obamacare.
Yeah, and then they just blow it off as though religious freedom gets the short shrift.
Get with the times.
No big deal for religious freedom. And then they turn it into a so-called war on women, which is really a war on our religious freedom and our fundamental values.
Quickly, let me ask you this, Matt. Obviously, we have an insurance system, even though it's the best in the world in its current form before Obamacare, it is still problematic. So if it's repealed, it needs to be replaced with something. We need to have good, comprehensive, common sense, free market insurance reform. Or if it's repealed or if it's thrown out, something is going to have to replace Obamacare, am I
right? Yes and no. I mean, certainly you can replace it with a lot of different kinds of things that help.
I don't mean
affordability,
a huge program.
Right, and accessibility. Mm-hmm. But Obamacare is not the way to do it. Maybe tomorrow we could talk, as we wrap up this week on Obamacare, about some of those ideas in terms of how you go forward if, in fact, Obamacare is repealed or struck down as unconstitutional. Call us at 1-800-671-1776 and ask for the book Resurgent, which is Ken Blackwell and Ken Klukowski's book called Resurgent. We also have my book called Take Back America. Both of those are right there on our web store, lc.org. And also ask for the bumper sticker, Lord, Deliver Us from Obamacare, and continue to pray and ask your church members, your Sunday school group to pray for this important case as it goes through the writing phase up through the end of June when it's released. Also go to lc.org and sign up for the Awakening 2012. We have over 60 national religious and political leaders coming to Orlando, Central Florida. April 20 and 2012, Friday night and Saturday. You can go to lc.org to sign up for that right now, and that is coming up quickly, so we hope to see you at this important